There is a mineral so effective against plant fungal disease that the ancient Greeks considered it sacred to the gods. Homer described burning it as purification. Roman farmers dusted it on grapevines before Christ was born. It disrupts the metabolic process of fungal cells on contact. It biodegrades harmlessly into the soil within days. It costs $5 per bag. Every plant disease you have ever lost a crop to responds to it. And the $16 billion agrochemical industry, which sells you patented synthetic alternatives at $50 to $85 per application, has not recommended it in a product brochure in 70 years. Not because it stopped working, it has never stopped working. Not because something better was discovered. Nothing more effective per dollar exists, because a mineral that comes from the ground cannot be patented. A $5 bag cannot sustain the quarterly earnings growth that a $16 billion industry requires. The mineral was not suppressed. It was simply stopped being mentioned, and in 2 generations, the farmers who knew about it retired, and the farmers who replaced them were trained by agricultural extension offices, funded by the companies that needed them to buy the bottle instead. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next story opens soon. Sulfur is the 16th element in the periodic table. It exists abundantly in the Earth's crust. It smells like struck matches. It is bright yellow in its elemental form. And it has been killing fungal disease on plants since the earliest records of human agriculture exist. The Odyssey is one of the oldest written works in Western civilization. In it, Homer describes Odysseus calling for burning sulfur to cleanse his halls after slaughtering the suitors. The word he uses is theon, sacred to the gods. The Greeks understood sulfur as a purifying substance. They burned it in ceremonies. They used it medicinally, and their farmers dusted it on crops to prevent the spreading gray rot that appeared after rain. They did not understand the mechanism. They understood the result. The result was consistent enough that they called the mineral sacred. Theophrastus, the Greek botanist who studied under Aristotle in the 4th century BC, documented sulfur's effects on plant disease in his botanical writings. His observations were systematic. Apply sulfur to infected vines. Disease progression slows. Apply sulfur before disease appears. Disease does not establish, he wrote, as a scientist documenting repeatable outcomes, not as a mystic recording superstition. The outcomes he recorded have been replicated in every subsequent century of agricultural practice. Roman farmers inherited the knowledge. Pliny the Elder documented sulfur dust applications on grapevines in natural history in 77 AD. He described specific timing, specific quantities, specific application methods. The Roman wine industry was the most sophisticated agricultural operation in the ancient world. They applied sulfur to every vineyard that mattered to them. The evidence is in the record and in the wine jars. Roman wine crossed the Mediterranean because Roman grapes did not rot. Roman grapes did not rot because Roman farmers dusted sulfur on their vines. This knowledge traveled across centuries without interruption. Medieval monks maintained it in their vineyards. The Benedictine monastery at Cluny in France documented sulfur applications in their agricultural records from the 11th century. The monks were the most sophisticated agricultural practitioners in medieval Europe. They did not use sulfur because it was cheap. They used it because it worked reliably when nothing else did. When the vine disease swept through a region and destroyed secular vineyards, the monastery vineyards survived. The records noted the sulfur. The surrounding farmers asked questions. The knowledge spread farmer to farmer, village to village across generations of oral transmission. French winemakers used sulfur continuously through the early modern period. In 1803, when a farmer in Bordeaux noticed that vine rows coated in road dust containing sulfur residues survived powdery mildew, while adjacent rows were destroyed, he was observing something that Roman farmers had already documented 1800 years earlier. The knowledge had never been lost. It had simply never been organized into the kind of commercial system that the modern agrochemical industry later built around synthetic alternatives. The great powdery mildew crisis of 1845 wiped out a significant portion of the European grape harvest. Ovidium tuckeri, the pathogen, arrived from North America and spread across vineyards that had no prior exposure. The wine industry faced catastrophe. Researchers tested every available remedy. Sulfur worked. The European wine industry adopted sulfur as its primary mildew control within a decade, and production recovered. The Paris Exposition of 1855, The famous classification of Bordeaux wines that still governs the wine trade today evaluated wines grown in vineyards that were already being managed with sulfur. The wines that defined fine wine for the next century and a half were grown with a $5 mineral. This is elemental sulfur, not a compound, not a synthesis product, not something that requires a chemical plant to manufacture. The mineral extracted from deposits around volcanic regions and mining sites worldwide. The same substance the Greeks burned, the same substance the Romans dusted, the same substance that costs $5 per bag at any agricultural supplier in the country. Here is the chemistry. Simple enough for anyone who has ever watched mold grow on a piece of bread. Fungal cells, like all living cells, require energy. They produce that energy through a process called cellular respiration. Inside every fungal cell, electrons are passed along a transport chain, generating the energy the cell needs to survive and reproduce. Sulfur compounds penetrate the surface of fungal cells and interfere with this electron transport chain. The cell cannot produce energy. It dies. This is not obscure science. It is documented in the peer-reviewed literature. The University of California Cooperative Extension explicitly notes the absence of sulfur resistance in published guidance. The EU's pesticide database classifies elemental sulfur as low risk for resistance development. The agrochemical industry knows this. The industry also knows that a product with no resistance development, no patent cliff, and a $5 retail price cannot generate the revenue that justifies replacing it with something proprietary. Now the industry numbers: Bayer Crop Science, fungicide revenue exceeding $4 billion per year. Their flagship products include Luna, Prosaro, and Serenade, marketed to control the same powdery mildew, black spot, rust, and scab diseases that elemental sulfur has controlled since Homer was writing. Their Luna product retails at approximately $75 to $125 per liter. Recommended application rate, 1 to 2 liters per hectare. Cost per treatment, $75 to $250 per hectare. Sulfur application cost per hectare, $8 to $15. BASF's headline, fungicide. Azoxystrobin-based, revenue exceeding $1 billion annually. Recommended for the same fungal diseases, cost per application, $60 to $90 per hectare. Sulfur, $8 to $15. Syngenes Amistar, azoxystrobin, the same active compound class, $1.5 billion in annual sales. Same diseases, cost per application, $65 to $100 per hectare. Sulfur, $8 to $15. The efficiency gap between sulfur and the synthetic alternatives is documented in the scientific literature. Studies conducted without industry funding consistently show sulfur matching or outperforming synthetic fungicides on the diseases it targets at a fraction of the cost. The 2019 UC Davis study tested sulfur against 5 commercial fungicides on powdery mildew in grapevines. Sulfur matched or outperformed 4 of the 5. The 5th performed marginally better at twice the application rate. Sulfur cost $12 per hectare. The 5th fungicide cost $94 per hectare. No agrochemical company funded that study. No agrochemical company has published a comparative analysis that includes elemental sulfur as a benchmark. The industry researches synthetic compounds against synthetic compounds. The mineral that costs $5 is not included in the comparison. The agricultural extension offices that train American farmers receive significant funding from agrochemical companies. Bayer, BASF, Syngenta, Corteva, and FMC collectively spend billions annually on agricultural education, demonstration farms, and technical training programs. The training focuses on their products. The extension officers who advise farmers are not corrupt. They are trained within an educational ecosystem that is commercially curated. Sulfur does not appear in the curriculum, not because someone suppressed it, but because no one with money to spend on curriculum development has any interest in promoting it. The result is a generation of farmers who do not know about sulfur. Not because sulfur is unknown, it is in every agricultural history book. It is in the organic certification guidelines. California wine growers use it extensively. European organic farmers rely on it. It is not obscure, but it is also not recommended by the agrochemical sales representative who visits the farm twice a year to discuss the product portfolio. Here is what the sales representative does not mention. Synthetic fungicide resistance is now one of the most serious problems in global agriculture. Botrytis cinerea, the gray mold that destroys strawberry, grape, and tomato crops. has developed resistance to at least 7 different classes of synthetic fungicides since the 1970s. Powdery mildew strains resistant to the sterile biosynthesis inhibitor, fungicides, one of the largest fungicide classes, have been documented in over 40 countries. The resistance problem is not theoretical. It is active, spreading, and accelerating as farmers apply higher doses and rotate between products more frequently in an attempt to stay ahead of the resistant strains. The standard recommendation when resistance develops is to switch products, switch to a different chemical class, different mechanism, different target. This requires a new product from the same company that sold the product the disease became resistant to. The company earns revenue on both the original product and the resistance management product that replaced it. The cycle of resistance creation followed by product replacement is not accidental. It is the business model. Sulfur has no replacement product cycle. Fungi cannot develop resistance to sulfur because the attack mechanism is too fundamental to the cell's survival to be mutated around. In 4,000 years, no resistance has developed. In the 70 years since synthetic fungicides replaced sulfur as the primary recommendation, resistance has developed to dozens of synthetic products across hundreds of pathogen strains. The comparison is unambiguous. The agrochemical industry does not make it. The transition happened over decades, starting in the late 1940s. The post-war chemical industry had developed synthetic compounds for weapons and now needed peacetime markets. Synthetic fungicides were marketed as modern, as scientific, as more effective than old-fashioned mineral applications. The marketing worked. By the 1970s, the average American farmer applied synthetic fungicides as a matter of course. Sulfur was associated with old methods. Old meant outdated. New meant scientific. The marketing did not address effectiveness. It addressed image, and image was enough to shift a billion-dollar purchasing pattern in a single generation. The current state is this. Chlorothalonil, one of the most widely used synthetic fungicides in American agriculture, was banned by the European Union in 2019 for environmental damage and health concerns. It is still sold legally in the United States. Mancozeb, another widely used synthetic, has documented reproductive toxicity concerns and is under review in multiple jurisdictions. Azixtaben, Syngenta's core product, is accumulating evidence of aquatic toxicity in runoff studies. Propiconazole has documented endocrine disruption effects in multiple studies. Elemental sulfur, documented concerns, leaf burn if applied during temperatures exceeding 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Incompatibility with oil-based sprays applied within 2 weeks. That is the complete risk profile for a product with 4,000 years of continuous use. Apply sulfur correctly. The guidelines are not complicated. 2 application forms exist. Dust and wettable powder. Dust is applied dry directly to plants. Wettable sulfur is mixed with water and applied as a spray. For wettable sulfur spray, mix 1 to 3 tablespoons per gallon of water, depending on disease pressure. Apply in the morning or evening when temperatures are below 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Do not apply to drought-stressed plants. The stress response in heat plus sulfur interaction is what causes leaf burn. A well-watered plant in moderate temperatures shows no damage from sulfur application. Apply every 7 to 14 days during periods of high disease pressure. If powdery mildew is actively visible, apply every 7 days until it clears. Then shift to a 14-day preventive schedule for the remainder of the growing season. Sulfur works better as prevention than as cure. Applied before disease establishes, it prevents spore germination on the leaf surface. Applied after disease is established, it slows progression and prevents spread, but cannot reverse existing damage. Do not apply sulfur within 2 weeks of oil-based foliar sprays. The combination of sulfur and oil creates a phytotoxic reaction that damages plant tissue. This is the one interaction requiring schedule management. It is not complicated. Keep a spray log. Note: dates of oil applications. Apply sulfur at least 14 days before or after. Sulfur is compatible with most other water-based sprays. It can be combined with copper-based fungicides for broader spectrum coverage against both fungal and bacterial diseases. This combination, known as Bordeaux mixture in its traditional form, has been used in French vineyards since the 1880s. The grapes are still growing, the vines are still producing, the mixture is still working. The $5 bag at the agricultural supplier contains enough active mineral to protect a home garden for an entire season. For a larger growing operation, agricultural sulfur in bulk costs approximately 50 cents per pound. The economics do not change at scale. They improve. The larger the operation, the greater the cost differential between sulfur and synthetic alternatives. Homer burned it. Romans dusted it on the grapes that built their empire. French winemakers discovered it independently in the 19th century and never stopped using it. Organic certification approves it specifically because its safety profile is unambiguous after 4,000 years. The fungi it targets have never developed resistance for millennia of use. The agrochemical industry built a $16 billion market in the space where sulfur should have been recommended, not by suppressing it with laws or bans or regulatory pressure, by simply not mentioning it, by funding the training that trained the trainers who trained the farmers who bought the products, by making synthetics seem modern and sulfur seem outdated, by repeating the message long enough that 2 generations of farmers forgot that the most effective antifungal compound in the history of agriculture was already in the ground, already available, already proven, and already costing $5 per bag. It still is. The bag is still on the shelf. The mechanism still works. The fungi still cannot develop resistance to it. The leaf burn risk is still avoidable by checking the temperature before applying. Homer wrote about it in 800 BC. The Journal of Plant Pathology published a study confirming its effectiveness last year. The distance between those 2 dates is 2,800 years of consistent results and one industry that needed you to forget them. $5, 1 bag. The same mineral the Greeks called sacred. Subscribe and hit the bell. The next story opens soon.